Jerry Dunleavy broke the story that Joe Biden was juicing the domestic terrorism numbers by a large factor by counting every individual J6 defendant as an individual domestic terrorism case. You're seeing the headline up there. Today, Chuck Grassley said while that was going on, the Biden administration let a terrorist into the country under the Afghan refugee program. We're very lucky to start the show with our amazing colleague and friend, Jerry Dunleavy. Jerry, good to have you here.
Glad to be here, as always.
Let's start with the juicing of the numbers. Great story. Everybody's been talking about it all day. What was the Biden FBI up to?
Yeah, so after January 6th, and then the President Biden taking office, we saw for years FBI Director Chris Wray, the DOJ, DHS, constantly going to this mantra that domestic terrorism cases had doubled since 2020. This is what they kept saying, and President Biden, the Biden administration, used that to launch new domestic terrorism initiatives, to launch a domestic terrorism national strategy. And I was always curious, what are the actual specifics about this? And for 4 years, the Biden administration refused to actually give details on what was actually driving this alleged rise in domestic terrorism. Well, ODNI declassified a document from the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center, and DHS from early 2022, which revealed that at that time, 61% of the 3,000 domestic terrorism cases that the FBI had opened, 61% of those were connected to January 6th.
Wow.
And out of the domestic terrorism arrests that the FBI made in 2021, 78% of them were related to January 6th. And so what you essentially had was this riot on one day for a number of hours on January 6th, driving this massive rise, alleged massive rise in domestic terrorism that was then cited for years and years and years by the Biden administration. But now we know that this supposed doubling is all just traced back to that one day.
Stunning. It's just stunning.
Democrats, as my dad would say, made hay while the sun was shining when it comes to January 6th. It seems to me that with January 6th and even COVID to some degree, maybe that was the casus belli, because with January 6th in particular, it was an excuse to strip away civil liberties, to violate people's privacy, to go after Americans, to increase the size of government when it came to the security state. Does it seem like that to you?
Well, look, I mean, now we know that they were using the riot that happened on January 6th to sort of artificially argue that the domestic terrorism threat in the United States had doubled. And they used that alleged increase in domestic terrorism threat to do Attorney General Garland's very notorious school boards memo going after protesting parents. They used it to institute for the first time a national domestic counterterrorism strategy. And underpinning all of that was sort of this artificial this artificial increase. And this is what President Biden talked about for 4 years. And if he had actually ended up running for president, this is what he was going to be running on. And now we know that this one day, this one riot, was used to justify just a huge slew of things for 4 years. And the big thing is that the American people for 4 years were not told what was actually underpinning this argument that the domestic terrorism threat, had doubled. Now, there were some FBI whistleblowers that came forward and told the truth about this, but these declassified documents that we finally have is the first time that we're seeing the FBI in its own words admitting that that was going on from the start.
Just amazing stuff. We got about 30 seconds. I want to turn to our first guest, who is one of those FBI whistleblowers. But Chuck Grassley, we actually let a terrorist into this country, didn't we? Yeah,
Grassley has now revealed that the DOJ Inspector General released a report that showed that during the disastrous and chaotic evacuation from Afghanistan, 55 Afghan evacuees, Afghan nationals, actually had hits on the terrorism database watch list, and something like a dozen of them, we didn't even know they had hits on it until they were already in the United States. Juxtaposing these two things, this I think artificial rise in domestic terrorism threat with the way that the Biden administration botched this withdrawal from Afghanistan and actually increased the foreign terrorism threat. I mean, this is a big deal. And of course, with both of these things, we're only finding these things out years later after he left office.